Stephan Hyme, author of a new best-selling novel, The Crusaders, meets critics Merle Miller and Margaret Burke White on The Author Meets the Critics. But first, meet your moderator of the afternoon, Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist James Michener.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. In the absence of John McCaffery, who this week takes his first vacation in many years from The Author Meets the Critics, I have been asked to act as the referee in today's battle about a book. This afternoon's Free-for-All is all about The Crusaders, a new novel published only 10 days ago. The New York Times calls it a long, solid, powerful, and highly dramatic book. But here is a distinguished young novelist, the author of That Winter, with a different opinion about The Crusaders, Mr. Merle Miller.
Well, first, I think I ought to point out that I don't think Mr. Hyme's book is a bad book. I certainly respect his intentions. I like what seems to be his political point of view. And I agree with most of what I guess I should say, he wants to say. But I don't think he said it especially well. Although I must admit he has said it at great length, 642 pages of it. I think what we have to do, and this is unfortunate, but this is part of the book business, part of publishing, I think we have to compare it with other war novels because it is a war novel. I think we have to compare it, for example, with Mr. Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead, which tells about a very little piece of the war, but tells it with so much drama and so much, if you'll pardon the word, guts, that you can't forget it. I think you have to compare it with the book that's to be published about 2 weeks from now, Mr. Irwin Shaw's The Young Lions, which is a book about all the war, which is told, I think, with great compassion and gentleness. And then I think we have to compare it finally with another book about to be published, Mr. James Gould Cousin's beautiful, and that's, I'm afraid, the only word to describe it, Guard of Honor, a book that deals only with an incident, but deals with it and with 30 or 40 people so that I don't think you can possibly forget them. Well, against these, then, I think Mr. Hyme's book comes off a commendable but very poor fourth. I think, unfortunately, that his villains are satiric caricatures and that his heroes are kind of well-cut paper dolls. They're all one-dimensional. And Mr. Hyme seems to have created them to say something, and as a result, they're kind of walking black-and-white theses. They're certainly not people. And always the reader, just as I'm afraid the novelist himself was, is on the outside looking in. So finally, as a piece of crusading journalism, I'll accept The Crusaders, but I must add, to my really great regret, it's not a good novel. In fact, I don't think it's a novel at all. And I'm very sorry because what he says certainly needs to be said in September of 1948.
With an entirely different point of view, here is one of the most brilliant women reporters and observers of the war, formerly associated with Time and Life magazine, Miss Margaret Burke White.
Well, as regards these walking black and white pictures who are the characters, of course, I like the walking black and white part of it because that's photographic. To me, they were very animated indeed. As far as the villains being satiric caricatures are concerned, I myself, in my own personal experience, met many similar characters. For example, a major that's described who was deep in the black market is the exact counterpart of a major that I met. Other villains among the GIs and brass are the exact counterparts of villains that I knew. And it seems to me that these heroes, whom my opponent calls paper dolls, have some very important things to say. For example, the sergeant, who's the central character of the book, introduces one of the writer's main themes, which has to do with something that's very close to all of us, the importance of democracy. This sergeant has to write a propaganda pamphlet, which is to be fired over the lines. And for a paper doll, or even for a flesh and blood sergeant, I think his choice of words and his thought is excellent. He says, "For these rights and liberties we are fighting today. For wherever they are threatened, we are threatened. Wherever the dignity of man is affronted, we feel that it happens to us, because we are that kind of a nation." And then another character says, "The main question is, do you believe in it? And how strong is your belief?" The author, Mr. Stephan Hyme, shows that he believes in these principles of democracy. I believe in them, and I feel that the many readers, which I'm certain this exciting book is going to have, will also believe in these principles.
And there, Mr. Hyme, you have an idea of what the critics are going to say about your book. Of course, they'll go on at length in just a little while, but before they begin, won't you tell us in your own words why you wrote The Crusaders and briefly what it's all about? Mr. Stephan Hyme.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I should like to say something about why I wrote The Crusaders. I wrote it because I had to. And I had to because of the intensity of my own experience, because of the silence of the dead, and because soldiers and officers time and again came to me, talked to me, and said, "You must put that in a book." I did not want to write a novel of World War II in the sense of battles and dates, nor write another book on the frequent theme that war is horrible. Sure, it's horrible, but there's more to it than that. The book which I felt had to be written was a novel of people, flesh and blood people, soldiers and civilians, and of the war's effect on them. The development of people as the story progresses is the human theme of the Crusaders. I believe that war does not really change people. It intensifies whatever is basic in them and brings the various elements of their makeup to quick and decisive clashes. In war, men's emotion rises to a far higher pitch at a greater rate of speed than is possible in peace. I have tried to create men and women on the Allied side and on the German side, and I have written them as the war showed them to me to be. On both sides of the front lines were chicanery and integrity, opportunism and bravery. People were molded and their emotions and actions were determined by the situations of the war, which in turn were equally determined by the character of the people and by their actions. The book has no hero in the accepted sense of the word. Some of the more important characters are involved in the warfare of ideas. This was deliberate on my part. Not so much because through my own war experience I knew something about that kind of thing, as because this forced the people in my book to face concretely and practically the question, what was the war being fought about? But certainly this was not only a war of ideas, and I hope that I have succeeded in recreating in the Crusaders the real hero of the war, the combat soldier. I have tried to write into this novel the war as I felt it, smelled it, tasted it, experienced it. As I understood its complexities, its diversity of aims, its crossing of purposes. I hope I have left the reader with a desire to speculate on how each of the Crusaders surviving the war is behaving in this peace, and what each may be doing to further what he believed he fought for.
Now back to the critics. Mr. Miller, will you continue your attack?
Well, I must confess, very moved by what Mr. Hyme has just said. And as I began by saying, I'm very moved by what he tried to do. But Miss Borquite, who is a very clever as well as very attractive young lady, in her opening statement did a dreadful thing to me. She implied that I didn't really believe in democracy, you see, if I didn't like this book. Well, now, this is effective, but it's not quite true. And just because I like Mr. Hyme, I don't also have to like his book. You know, I think this is a dangerous trend. I see it in certain book review columns I read. If an author is kind to his mother or likes dogs, he therefore writes good books. Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. You have to consider the novel as a novel.
Well, Mr. Miller, what is the focus of your dislike of the book, then?
Well, simply that all of the characters, whether they are Captain Loomis or Major Willoughby, both of whom are later promoted, since they're villain types, they would get promoted in the Army, or on the other side, the sergeant, who I think is a pretty good character, Sergeant Byng, who doesn't, as I recall, get promoted in the book. He's a good man. On both sides, these people just don't come through. They don't come through to me as people. And for one thing, as Mr. Hyme has said, they do a lot of talking about what the war is about. Well, I must confess, I never heard that kind of conversation. I wish I had.
Well, Miss Borquite, I judge that they do come through to you.
They certainly come through to me. Besides, I heard a great deal of that kind of conversation, especially toward the end of the war. And it's about that phase of the war that this book is written.
Well, you knew a higher type person than I did, probably.
Oh, I knew a great many of sergeants and corporals and privates. And possibly, I might suggest, the people who find this book boring are people who aren't sufficiently interested in the problem. I wouldn't dream to say people who don't believe in democracy, because I'm quite certain that everybody in this room does. But the thing that is so gripping about the book is the fact that it does explore this question of democracy and how it's going to work out with our future peace. But it does it in a very swift, moving style. And I'm very anxious to have people realize that this is an exciting book. It was a book that I wasn't able to put down. After all, maybe it is 600 pages long. But War and Peace is a long book, too. And possibly some people have skipped portions of War and Peace. But I found this a very very exciting book up until the last page.
Mr. Miller, here we have a novel which starts in the latter stages of the war with a group of American men, takes them through the fall of Paris, through the capture of concentration camps, through a variety of experiences in the Bulge, through the occupation of Germany, and I judge ends sometime in 1946. Do you find that the total tapestry that he has woven doesn't wear for you?
No, I don't think it does. I think what Mr. Hyme should have done, what I wish he had done, would have been to have written a factual book about that exact period. Because, well, let me give you an example of why it troubles me. When I read about the Battle of the Bulge, for example, some parts of it are a little vague in my mind at the moment. I certainly don't remember, never did know what the Germans did. Well, here I was reading about these characters planning the Battle of the Bulge, this attack behind American lines. And instead of feeling sympathy and understanding with the characters who were doing this, I kept asking myself, well, now, is that really the way it happened? You see what I mean? It comes through as a piece of journalism rather than as a creative piece of art, to me at least.
Well, do you find journalism bad in a novel?
Not a bit, but I think if we're going to have journalism, we should put it in the newspapers and in factual books. And if we're going to have novels, we should have novels.
Miss Burke-White is a journalist. Let's hear her view on this.
Well, all this reminds me of this ancient and very tiresome argument about photography. Is photography art? As a photographer, my point of view is that it doesn't make any difference whether it's an art or not, as long as it does the job. Some pictures are beautiful, and some pictures make a point. I think that the author of this book has a perfect right to handle the subject matters he chooses, and from the standpoint of this reader, it's handled very dramatically and effectively.
Mr. Miller.
Well, Miss Burke-White, let me give you an example of what I mean. You remember the man I've already mentioned, Captain Loomis. Now, in one scene, and one quite good scene, as a matter of fact, this rather dim-witted Colonel DeWitt turns to Captain Loomis, who is a black marketeer, who is a dreadful man, who does everything that was done by all the captains I've ever met, and some things they didn't think of. DeWitt says to the captain, why did you do this? You used to have a radio store in someplace in New Jersey. I didn't know they had them in New Jersey, but he did. You used to have a radio store somewhere in New Jersey, the Colonel says, and Loomis says, yes. And the Colonel says, well, once you got in the war, you liked ordering people around, didn't you? And the captain says, yes. And the Colonel says, well, I'm paraphrasing, you're pretty much of a cad, aren't you? And the captain says, yes. Well, that's the only report in the entire book about this major character which in any way explains his character, and I submit that doesn't explain why he is a villain. There were a lot of captains who didn't do this kind of thing. I've got to know, in other words, why he did it. Why was he a villain? Why was Willoughby a villain?
Miss White, can you explain
that? Well, as far as Captain Loomis being alive or not being alive, he came alive for me from the first minute that he tried to vamp the woman war correspondent. And throughout the whole book, I feel his character was quite consistent.
Well, as a matter of fact, I was going to be polite. I didn't want to bring up that incredible war correspondent.
As I remember, didn't all the men try to vamp the woman war correspondent?
And most of them, I might add, succeeded.
Well, that was...
Well, my feeling is that was up to her. She was a very attractive girl, and to me she was a very convincing girl, allowing her to manage her own personal affairs as she chooses.
Well, Miss Burke-White, I think it was not so much her realism that you admired. You were more envious of her.
Well, I don't... From where I sit, I don't think that Miss Burke-White needs to be envious of the war correspondent in this novel. I did find the war correspondent a sort of flat picture. In what way did you find that she had vitality?
Well, she fell in love every now and then, convincingly as far as I was concerned. I would call that vital. I think the very description of her is excellent. Her face was not beautiful. It was rather plain. And the helmet hiding the hair was not too helpful. And whatever her figure may have been, it was swallowed up in overalls. Yet her presence transformed everybody. The man behind the switchboard began to clean his nails.
Yes, that is good writing.
That is
good writing. I think now you have a good picture of both sides, pro and con, on Stepham Hyme's The Crusaders. It's now time to hear more from the author himself, Mr. Stepham Hyme.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. First of all, I want to say that I'm very grateful to Merle Miller for criticizing this book in a very fair and objective way. He does not object to whatever politics is in the book, because there really would be a basis of argument. He bases his argument merely on the fact that the villains do not come true, the heroes do not come true. Now, that's a thing that it's very difficult for me to argue about, because that's a matter of taste. Some people will say, and I think the vast majority of the reviewers in this country have said so, that these characters are immensely alive, and that they come true. But he raises another question. Mr. Miller raises another question. Namely, why are they villains? Or why are they heroes? And here I would like to make a statement that might surprise Mr. Miller. I don't think these people are villains. Neither are they heroes. And that's what the whole point of the book is about. And I'm afraid, and I'm sorry, that he didn't quite catch on. Now, Willoughby is not a villain. Willoughby is a businessman. And he's a businessman in war and a businessman in peace. And he acts according to his lights in war and in peace.
Mr. Hyme, may I interrupt there a moment on this point of Mr. Willoughby?
Pardon me, I don't mean that all businessmen are villains.
No, I realize that. But as I read the book, I felt that you had constructed a picture of Willoughby, the arch-villain of the piece, speaking grammatically, whether you conceived him as such or not. And at the end, he just wanders off the page scot-free. What was your purpose in that? Simply to show that villains aren't caught up with, or that...
Well, actually, Willoughby was punished very hard. He was punished by the contempt of everybody with whom he had to deal. That actually he succeeds in putting through the business deal on which he had been working all the time. Well, that is to his good credit. But I think he has been punished. I think also that the forces in the book that fought for the good side, Yeats and Byng, though Byng dies very horribly, they succeeded, at least in one way or another, to bring forward the good things that we fought for in the war.
I can see 100 enlisted men reading this novel and seeing the picture of Major Willoughby, the arch big dealer, stealing wherever he went, using the army for his personal preference and so on, reading about Willoughby with a real thrill.
Actually, Willoughby didn't steal.
Well, he stole everybody.
Legal.
Yeah,
it was legal. That's right. Yes. But I can see them reading about him with a feeling of real joy, and then feeling a bit of letdown at the end, in that he does get off, it seems to me.
Well, I feel that you should not give in too much to the desires of a reader to see the villain punished. But as I said, there is no villain in this book. I'd like to bring out something else, if I may.
Won't you please?
And that is that it is not a question of enlisted men versus officers. There are some pretty bad enlisted men in this book, and there are also some pretty good officers. I'm sorry that Captain Troy, who finally gets together with that war correspondent, was not mentioned.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Hyme, I'm glad you brought him up, because he is my favorite character in the book. He makes sense, and I'll tell you why. He doesn't make much philosophic talk. He's an extremely good combat officer, and you can sense from the way you've developed him, now this is a good human being, but not because of what comes out of his mouth, simply because, at least to me, I understood him and I respected him. I liked him.
You would say, Mr. Miller, that he is the solitary character who does come through that way.
No, there are a couple of other more minor ones, but of the major characters, I thought he was a complete, utter success.
Well, I'm very happy that you can see that, Mr. Miller.
Miss Burke-White.
Well, in regard to the many other characters, all the characters, in fact, besides these two or three which Mr. Miller approves of, I think it's very important to remember one thing when reading a book. It's not entirely what the author does, it's partly what the reader does. The capacity of the reader to respond is important. Now, Mr. Miller, although I haven't read his famous, and I understand, excellent book, is the professional cynic, or has that reputation. Obviously, he takes a pretty hopeless view, or shall we say a wintry view. If he's going to make a career out of disillusionment, my feeling is, what can we hope for anyway? And I would like to address to him a question stated by one of the main characters in the book, who says, now let's see if I can find it. Yes, it's in this very dramatic incident where where the sergeant is trying to put across his message about democracy and is trying to encourage the German soldiers to surrender. And they start shooting at him. And Byng shouts out, "Stop that goddamn shooting. Are you so much afraid of the truth that you can't afford to listen?" Are you, Mr. Miller?
No, not a bit. In answer to that, I'd like to take on, I'm sure Mr. Hyme won't agree, nobody ever does when you pick out a sentence from an author, But there's a paragraph that I like, which seems to me to sum up, in a sense, the whole book, and I wish there were more like this. It's when Colonel DeWitt says of American soldiers, he says, we can't take success. As a matter of fact, I might explain. At this time, they've just come through Normandy. They've just cut across France. Terrific fighting. They get to Paris. It's beautiful. It's lovely. It's wonderful. And the colonel says, we can't take success. The same men I've seen working like so-and-sos when the stuff was flying around, look at them now. Watch them swagger, throwing their weight around. Nobody can touch us, they say. We're tough. Sometimes I'm afraid of what will happen if and when we win the war. Well, there, it seems to me, is as far as one reader was concerned, is the question of the book. It didn't come through clearly enough.
Well, Mr. Hyme, is that what you were driving at?
That was one of the questions of the book. I'd like to answer that. I'd like to use Mr. Miller's question here also as an argument in my favor. Because before he said that these characters philosophize. I don't think they do. And whenever you feel that there is some philosophical values spoken by one or the other, it comes out perfectly natural, I think, in the conversation. And now as to your question, Mr. Mitchell, I had here an introductory statement which was cut in the beginning. So I'd like to read that one paragraph which might answer your question.
What's the deal with Mr. Hyme?
I consider The Crusaders a historical novel, but perhaps because it covers such recent history, it may hold meaning for the present. The conflicts of this war have continued and the conflicts of the peace that has followed. The germs of our present-day anxieties were evident on the battlefields, in the cities liberated and conquered, and in the staff headquarters of World War II. I think.
Well, I'm sure that everyone who writes a book writes with magnificent ideas in prospect. The question is, do they come through? Mr. Miller, I used to know a little kid I used to argue with, and I always argued in big, vague terms, and he pinned me down, give me a for instance. Now, let's have some for instances in your case as to specific points which you didn't like.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say something about what Mr. Hyme has just said about its pertinency now, this whole battle. I hope everybody listening read this weekend the story from Germany about that lovely young aesthete in the concentration camp who made lamps and book covers out of human skin. She was first given a lifetime sentence. It has now been commuted to 4 years. Brother, the battle still goes on. So it is pertinent. Now, what specifically, what parts of it didn't I find convincing? Well, I must say I found all of the battle scenes not convincing at all, particularly the battle scenes about the Battle of the Bulge. Well, that, of course, is where the big part of the battle comes. To me, it just didn't ring true. It had none of the emotion, none of the sentiment, and I think battle is primarily sentimental, and none of the real, the kind of feeling that I think Mr. Mailer gets in The Naked and the Dead. Now, this, again, is a personal thing. Maybe other people wouldn't agree.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, you brought up this other book of Mr. Mailer's, because I don't feel it's my place here to criticize another author. Definitely not. What I would like to say in regard to those battle scenes, you said they were primarily sentimental. Well, I've been shot at in the war several times, and I've seen men die next to me. I didn't find it sentimental at all. Also, I
understand, Mr. Hyme, that you went. I understand that you went with the American troops right from the landing at Normandy through the occupation in Germany, so that this isn't a pipe dream that you're writing about.
No,
we can assume that you know what you're talking about.
I tried to give the best possible honest picture that I could give of what I myself felt and what I know men next to me felt in this whole terrible suffering that the war meant to people.
Well, your next point, Mr. Miller, I think we've handled that one rather well.
Yes, I think it was very well answered, as a matter of fact.
Thank you.
Well, another character, specifically, that just made no sense at all to me and was like no French girl I ever knew, was the character...
Have you no comment on that, Ms. Workwhite?
Well, I'm not a French girl, but I can certainly vouch for the American girl who came through as far as I'm concerned.
I'm not sure how you pronounce this. Teresa?
I would say Therese.
Therese.
Use a French pronunciation. Now,
she just didn't come through, and then as several of the characters, she came to this camp at Verdun and met the lieutenant, and they went out together for the evening, and then suddenly after he sees her, she ends. Where she goes, heaven knows, she just kind of wandered off. Yeah. Which, again, several of the other characters in the book, I kept wondering, now, whatever happened to old so-and-so?
You know the old saying in the war, c'est la guerre.
Well,
However, about the French girl, I don't want to speak too much about those that I have known, but I think that she is pretty much true to life, and it happened to a man I knew. A French girl came and found him under very difficult circumstances, and then the men in the unit went out of the way to make it possible for him to be together with her. And they felt about it, I think they wanted to do something to prove that the war was not entirely nonsensical, that at least there was something beautiful in it for two people.
Well, now, in Mr. Miller's opening statement, he compared this book with 3 novels that have not yet been published, and implied that Mr. Hyme was at fault for not having matched 3 books that hadn't yet been published. It seemed to me
only 2 of them
as if you were asking him to be sort of a ghostwriter here in almost perfection of equaling things that hadn't yet been done. Do you think it's fair to compare a book with a whole host of other books and say it's not as good as those books, therefore it's no good?
Oh, of course, it certainly is fair. I wonder how many war novels were written in whatever year it was in the late 19th century when Mr. Leo Tolstoy wrote a little volume called War and Peace. I wonder how many war novels were published in 1923 when Mr. Ernest Hemingway wrote Farewell to Arms. I wonder how many were published in 1924 when John Dos Passos wrote Three Soldiers, etc.
Well, let me ask.
Of course, that's the only basis of comparison you can have.
Don't you think this novel will compare favorably with Hemingway's Farewell to Arms?
No, I do not.
May I say something about this comparison business? I know only one of the books that Mr. Miller has mentioned, and I don't want to make any comparisons. I can only say that some of the reviewers compared mine quite favorable with, they didn't say it was War and Peace, but they said it was something like it. But what I want to say is this war was...
And I judge it made you very happy when they did.
But I would like to say this, that this was a very, very big war. And I don't think that one author alone can do entire justice to a thing that went all over the globe and that involved millions and millions of people. Understand there's even another war book coming out written by a German, Theodor Plivier, about Stalingrad, which I'm just reading now, which is going to be awfully good. So I think there's a place for all of us, and we can all say what we feel.
Ms. Bork-White?
Well, I think one of the most important things to consider is not comparing this book with other books, but comparing it with the purpose and considering whether or not that purpose was achieved. I feel that the author achieved his purpose dramatically and forcefully. And once more, to drag in this woman war correspondent who's so much maligned, but who I feel crystallizes the thought in the book. She speaks of how this sergeant has to work out these ideas about democracy. And she says a very telling thing. She says it required, first of all, that you be absolutely clear in your own mind, sure of yourself, sure that you believed in the justice of your cause. It meant believing in the principle of good and evil. And on that point, I feel the author scores.
I'm sorry, Miss Bork-White and gentlemen. Time is up now for both the author and the critics. And here's Bob Sherry to tell you what lies ahead for The Author Meets the Critics.
Well, on the spot next week is one of the most widely read columnists in America. He's the brilliant writer for the Scripps Howard newspapers, Robert C. Ruark. Bob Ruark's new book is called I Didn't Know It Was Loaded, and it is a series of comments, personalities, sketches, gripes, anecdotes, and satire, covering every facet of American life, from sports to fashion, with essays on subjects as various as Leo DeRocher to the National Association of Bed Manufacturers. Robert Ruark has a nationwide reputation for pulling no punches, and we're looking forward to seeing what happens next week as he meets his critics. And now back to James Michener.
Before closing, I'd like to thank Stepham Hyme for coming here today to discuss his new book, The Crusaders, and to thank you, Margaret Bork-White, and you, Merle Miller, for joining us. This is James Michener saying good afternoon for The Author Meets the Critics.
The Author Meets the Critics is produced by Martin Stone, directed by Arthur Austin. This is Bob Sherry speaking. This is NBC, the national broadcasting company.